lot of my interviews just kind of keep on pinging around this kind of this phenomena that I think of on the internet of current thingism, where there's a topic that's the topic of the day, and sometimes the topic is very complex, and then everybody tries to distill it down into a GIF or a meme or a little like flag in their profile picture.
Yeah.
But most of these events are way too complicated, and even scientists themselves, people who dedicate their lives to figuring out, historians or scientists, academics figuring out like this one little niche topic that then is suddenly in the public eye, even they dispute amongst each other about what's going on. And global warming is one of those things where nobody, I mean, the layman can't really trust any other layman's knowledge. You need an expert to even just guide you through all the expert opinions on it.
Yeah, I mean, sort of, but I do have a simple story about that if you'd like to hear it.
Oh, you can meme it?
Yeah. Yeah, well, I don't know if I can meme it, but here's the simple. So one of the assignments in my class is to do a 60-second video of explaining the scientific evidence related to global warming. And so like the idea is so that the students can sort of package what they learned and tell it to other people if someone asks them. But here's how I would do that. So first I would say, this will take slightly more than 60 seconds, but I hope you'll forgive me.
Time.
Okay, so the first thing is the temperature increasing? So the temperature of the global mean temperature of the planet, just from going around and sticking, out thermometers, we've known it for 250 years, let's say. Before about 1850 or so, it gets harder to estimate because there are fewer measurements and the thermometers are a little less precise, mostly just because there are fewer measurements. But let's say since 1850, for sure, we know it really well. And in the last 170 years, the temperature has increased by about 2 degrees Fahrenheit. And nobody disagrees about that. Okay, everybody agrees about that. Now, the last major independent effort to do that was about 10 years ago. It was a group at Berkeley, and it was run by a guy named Mueller, who's a physicist and did not think that Earth had warmed. He thought people were lying about this, and he went and independently analyzed the data and got consistent results with what the others had gotten. So that's point one. Point two is we can measure. So people have been measuring, bless you, the CO2 release, the CO2 level in the atmosphere since 1960 or so. It's difficult to measure carefully because it's relatively low concentration. Okay, and so we know that it's increased from about 315 parts per million to about 415 between 1960 and today. And then you can go into ice cores, like in glaciers, and you can dig up the ice and find little bubbles in it. And there's annual layers, so you can count back the year, and you can measure the CO2 before. Okay, it matches what our record in the atmosphere, and then you can measure what it was before, and it was about 280 parts per million, before 1700 or so. So we know that the CO2 has increased. Now, you have a particular expected signal that you should get a temperature increase from the CO2 change, and that's exactly what you see in the temperature increase. Okay, so it has the right shape in terms of the record of the CO2. The other big thing you notice there are occasional volcanic eruptions that cause global coolings. And you can explain the temperature data just from the CO2 increase and occasional coolings from volcanic eruptions. The other potential ways to explain that warming, like variations in the solar forcing, they don't explain it. It doesn't work. There hasn't been that type of variation in the solar forcing. So we have very strong, direct empirical evidence that the CO2 has increased and that caused a temperature increase. So that's the basic thing that everyone needs to know. And then, of course, there's the theoretical point that we understand radiative transfer fairly well, and the amount of temperature increase is roughly what you would predict from the amount of CO2 increase we've had. Where it gets uncertain is what's going to happen in the future. And the reason is that there's been a relatively small change in temperature so far. And so there's room for a fair amount of disagreement that can still roughly match what we've seen. And so, how much of a problem global warming will be depends on whether you believe the lower end temperature forecast or the higher end for the next, couple hundred years.
And that forecast is based on CO2 emissions, or?
Yeah, well, there's two components. The first is the scientific component. So there's uncertainty in the science. And in particular, these forecasts are done with models. The models can match the historical data, but they have some knobs they can tune to make that happen. And so then they diverge into the future.
Yeah.
And this divergence is mostly due to cloud behavior because the clouds have a small scale. The size of clouds is about, a kilometer to 100 kilometers. And the grid boxes.
This is not a metaphorical like cloud server farm that's doing the calculations. No. You're talking about actual clouds.
Actual clouds.
The ones up in the sky with the rain.
The ones in the sky.
Okay.
Yeah, no, right. The uncertainty is not due to numerics. It's due to physical processes. A difficulty in resolving the physical processes. So I guess, you could imagine this is roughly how it works. Suppose you have a paintbrush that's 1/2 inch by 1/2 inch. And you're trying to write letters that are a 1/16 inch by a 1/16 inch. It's not going to work. And it's the same problem with the clouds. They're too small for the size. The smallest size in the model is like 100 kilometers by 100 kilometers, but clouds are smaller than that. So then you have to come up with parameterizations, which are theoretically motivated formulas and empirically, in the current climate, empirically constrained formulas for what the large scale behavior is, mapping it onto small scale behavior. But the problem is there's uncertainty and the models disagree on those.
Yeah.
And so that's where there's scientific disagreement. And then there's also, we don't know how much CO2 is actually going to be emitted, right? That, it depends. It's one of these economics problems that the behavior of humans is influenced by, predictions and et cetera, et cetera. So we can't make a prediction. If you make a prediction, it influences the behavior of humans. So it's a complicated problem. Yeah. Then those are the issues why there's uncertainty. And there are a variety of viewpoints that could be consistent with the scientific mainstream, ranging from a guy at NYU, the physicist who wrote about this recently, on the one hand, who would be arguing for a lower temperature change. I can't remember what that guy's name is. He wrote a book and everybody read it. I didn't read it, but I saw him give a talk on it. So anyways, so someone can say everything I just said, and then they can argue that the clouds are going to adjust to lead to a relatively small change in temperature. And somebody else can say the clouds are going to adjust to lead to a large change in temperature. Yeah. Personally, I prefer to just say there's a large amount of uncertainty in what's going to happen in the future. Yeah. And then there's also the question of, once you have that information and the uncertainty has been appropriately conveyed, whose job is it to make the decision of what humans should do? And that's where I probably diverge from some of my colleagues, where my opinion is the job of the scientist is to provide disinterested analysis from a scientific perspective, and not to try to influence how society uses that. And most importantly, not to present the evidence in a way that's intended to influence how society uses that. The alternative viewpoint is that we scientists have so much more information than other people that it would be irresponsible to let the politicians and the public just decide for themselves. We have to try to help them decide. So that's the steel manning of the alternative viewpoint. But my opinion is that's just not an acceptable way to view the world in a democracy, in a republic. And we have to trust, if we're trusting the people with the ability to choose, we have to trust them with the ability to choose. And the other thing is, scientists don't have a global perspective. So, I'm really good at science and math and teaching, but I don't necessarily understand economics and all the implications of these other issues. And so it would be a mistake to privilege the position that the specialist takes on an issue without consulting alternative specialists. And
Well, yeah,
also,
it's another climate that you're going to be affecting, and
yeah,
you can't really predict. I mean, what are the size of the clouds in that? In
well, I mean,
models that,
that's something we can attempt to do scientifically, but
yeah.
I'm sort of bracketing the question of how should society respond, and saying that, in my opinion, the role of the scientist is to provide the information and the uncertainty and allow society to decide how to respond.
I, I, I got confused about clouds. What's up with the clouds? Is this
Why
like
are
a
they hard to
computer?
model?
Yeah. Well, why are they modeled? Why are they important to model?
Well, they're important because, okay, so suppose you double the carbon dioxide in the atmosphere. So we've gone from 280 to 415 parts per million. So it's less than a doubling, what we've done so far. Suppose you double it. The radiative forcing is 4 watts per meter squared. If that unit doesn't make sense to you, it doesn't matter, because I'm going to compare something to that.
Good.
The clouds cool the planet by 50 watts per meter squared. And they warm the planet by 30 watts per meter squared, for a net cooling of 20 watts per meter squared. Yeah. So it's much bigger than doubling the CO2. And so if the clouds change, as the CO2 increases, if the clouds change, they can drastically increase the amount of temperature change you get, or decrease. That's why they're important.
Okay. And they're formed by moisture.
Yeah, the condensation of moisture in the air. And they interact strongly with both the sun's radiation. They reflect sunlight and cool the planet. Yeah. And they also absorb Earth's radiation and act as an additional source of the greenhouse effect, warming the planet. So they have both effects.
Okay. So they can block the light in and then keep the radiation
Exactly.
in. Or not light, but radiation.
Yeah, the light. They can block the sun's light as it's coming in, and that's why you can see clouds. That's why it's darker on a cloudy day. Yeah. And they can also block Earth's radiation going out. And that's why at nighttime on a cloudy day, it's warmer than it is on a clear day, because the clouds make an infrared blanket.
And so the model is to try to predict to what degree the cloud cover is going to change in response to the warming.
Exactly. Cloud cover and cloud types. And that influences. So these models, they do the fluid flow and they do the radiative transfer. And one of the big things that influences the radiative transfer, the radiation flowing around, is the clouds.
Mm-hmm. Okay. And like you said, those models are trying to, they're very coarse, and they're trying to draw these fine lines with a very coarse brush, basically.
Well, so I mean, it is a global question, right? So like for modeling the planet, they have a very high resolution. And for a lot of processes like the weather, people were able to do reasonable weather predictions 60 years ago with crappy models that you could run on your watch. But because you don't need a very high resolution to roughly get the weather right. But when you start asking how are the clouds going to respond, then that's the issue with the brush. And it turns out that's important for long-term climate. How are the clouds going to respond? So it's just a problem that is tricky.
Yeah. I have to get the cat out because she's destroying a box. I'll be right.
So that's the kind of thing. So that's not actually what my research is on, but I teach that.
Okay.
It's kind of like a public service. And also, the global warming stuff is kind of the thing to attract students. My actual job is, it's a core science class. And so my actual job is to try to raise the level of scientific understanding of the students. And so the way I motivate the way the classes run, they're 30 student groups of 30, each taught by a graduate student lecturer. And I'm sort of running the whole show.
Oh.
And the way I motivate them, one of the ways, the lecturers, is I say, these annoying kids, some of them are going to be like a CEO or a senator 25 years from now. And one of us nerds is going to go into their office and say a bunch of weird numbers and show some plots. And this is your chance to give that senator at least a teeny little chance that they could actually understand what the nerd's saying.
Mm-hmm.
And so that's the goal, to try to, improve quantitative literacy.
Quantitative literacy, by which you mean statistics?
No, just general, so literacy would be your ability to read and write, and quantitative literacy would be your ability to, read plots.
To code, yeah.
No, not even code, just to read plots. Like if I show you a figure, a figure with data on it, can you extract the information and draw conclusions from it? Make simple calculations, can you do the percentage change? Do you know what the order of magnitude is? Can you write something in scientific notation? How much bigger is a billion than a million? Do you know?
It depends on what country you're from, I just learned.
Is that true?
Yeah, the Brits say it's a number with 1,000 thousands or something like that.
Okay, so how much bigger? Okay, so how much bigger is a million than 1,000? That's even.
Yeah, you just add another 3 zeros from my Western or my American.
Yeah. Which means it's 1,000 times bigger.
Yeah. No.
Can you do manipulations like that? Do you know what the debt's like, whatever, so many trillion? I don't actually know what it is, but do you know what that means? Could you say could you take the debt and divide it by the number of people in the country and say, how much is that per person? Those types of games are really useful. And that would be basic quantitative literacy.
Okay. And so your courses run from freshman up to senior then? The ones?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. And so it's run twice a year. And the way it works is however many students need to get supported for graduate students. So they got to teach to make their money.
Yeah.
Unless they have a grant or something separate. But so however many students the department needs, the extra, they stick them in my class, and then it sucks up however many students we need. And then we always fill that. We always have extra demand from undergrads. And so,
okay.
So we've had as few, I think the least ever was 180 students, undergrads, and the most was 390.
Oh, how are you guys doing this year?
Right now, there were 8. They needed 8 graduate students supported, so we have 240 undergrads.
Oh, that's healthy.
Yeah,
kids are getting educated still.
Yeah, it's fun.
How long have you been doing this level teaching, like teaching in college?
Well, it depends what you mean. So I actually I was an undergrad at Harvard. And my freshman year, I got a job teaching in the night school in chemistry for people who wanted to become doctors. Because I had taken a chemistry class and I got perfect score on everything. And so the professor asked me if I wanted to do that. And that was fun because these were adults. It was people who had already been to college and they were trying to go back and do their science to go to med school. And I was like a skinny 18-year-old kid.
Oh, wow.
It was fun. But so that's when I started. I guess that would be right around the turn of the century. That would be fall of 2000, something like that.
Okay.
And then, but I started on the faculty in 2011 at UChicago.
2011.
And then in between that, I taught most of the time between that. I enjoy teaching, so I kept teaching.
I can tell you have a fire in your eyes, doing all this quantitative stuff and watching me flail trying to keep up with you.
Well, it's interesting because so the dirty secret of a big research institution like UChicago is that the faculty are not selected in even the teeniest way based on their teaching ability.
Yeah.
So it's not like Williams College or something where that's a huge component of how they pick faculty and whether they give them tenure. So that's, like if you have someone who is just you'd have to be terrible. But if you had someone who was such an awful teacher that it was just a joke, they would just let them teach 2 student graduate seminars. And so it's just a crapshoot whether faculty members happen to be interested in teaching or not.
Yeah.
And I actually enjoy it and I think it's fun. And I really like this flipped class method where I have the students read stuff at home and then they come in and they work in class. And the reason I like that is because for me, I can't stand listening to other people talk. It's so boring to me.
Oh,
I need to be doing something. I'm a very active person,
okay.
and I
So
want to be.
you don't have a lot of podcasts that you listen to then?
Well, if I listen to a podcast, it's while I'm doing my chores,
Yeah.
or driving to work. But I certainly wouldn't just sit there and listen to a podcast,
Yeah.
or like we don't have a television. I wouldn't. It's just boring to me to sit there and do nothing. So I want to be doing some working or doing some calculation or something myself. And so I get really bored when I go to lectures personally. And I used to respond to that by just interrupting the lecturer and asking questions, but I've gotten better behaved as I've gotten older. Every time I would get bored or start to fall asleep, I would just interrupt and ask about something I was interested in.
Huh.
But anyway, so I was receptive when this idea of flipped classes came out. And of course, I'm interested in the data, and the data show that they're much more effective. So then I started implementing them in my teaching, and it seems to be more engaging.
What does work mean then in your classes if they're going and reading and then coming in and
Well,
working?
so they read the notes at home, and then they have basically a problem set that they do every class meeting, but they do it in small groups. And the lecturer, the grad student's there to help them in case they have a question.
What's a problem set? You're like, Pompeii's about to erupt, stop it.
Well, yeah, it would be, I mean, it's different things, but I mean, let me give you a funny one. So one of them is about units. And so, the reading is stuff like, do you know who Big Poppy is?
Is that like Puff Diddy's
David
sister?
Ortiz, the baseball player.
No.
Okay, so imagine a big baseball player. And did you know that he and who's that singer? Ariana Grande. Have you ever heard of her?
Grande, yeah, I saw her in a movie explaining bets.
She's not very large. So did you know that they both weigh 105? So it turns out he's 105 kilos and she's 105 pounds.
Yeah, okay.
They're supposed to be learning about. And then the other one I have in there is I went to Canada, and despite their reputation as, very polite people and nice people, their speed limit indicated no regard for safety. It was 110 miles per hour. Yeah. But anyway, so they read that stuff like that, and they have to learn that units are important. And then the problem set is about NASA had I think it was called New Horizons, but they had a mission to Mars that the impulse, which is kind of like the force times the time that you apply it. So it's something that you need to use to steer a space mission. The impulse was in units of pound seconds, and the engineers thought it was in units of Newton seconds, and it caused them to crash and lose this like hundreds of millions of dollar mission.
Oh no, what's a Newton second? I haven't heard of that.
Well, Newton's just a way to measure force in the international system.
Okay. So
it was English system, international system conversion problem. But So they work through this example and they see how it happened, and it's supposed to make them pay attention to units. So that's one of these things at the beginning of class, just so, like before we get into the meat of the global warming topic.
Yeah.
So they would come in. So it'd be a 50-minute long class. They would come in for 10 minutes, and they're going to get a mini lecture from the lecturer, then 30 minutes of working on these problems in groups, and then 10 minutes going over the answers. And then my job is to run the whole thing. I go around and visit the sections, but I obviously can't be in 8 sections per day. So I visit them usually once or twice during the quarter. And then I have office hours. That's where I meet with the students individually.
Are they working on independent projects, or are they just interfacing with the work that you
They're just doing, it's all quantitative work, and they have, math quizzes and stuff. It's not, I mean, they do have this final project where they explain the data. And so anyway, so it's fun. And, I think hopefully it's like a public service. I view it the same way as going on podcasts, like it's not my favorite thing to do, but it's an important public service. It's part of I view it as part of the duty as a faculty member to, especially there are important issues that right now in society have to get talked about, and not many people want to talk about them.
Okay.
So,
Well, since we're on the topic of important issues, what's the most important one right now for you?
For it related to academic stuff.
I was going to ask earlier, like, since you've been in the academy since 2000, whatever, you've been there for 22 years, so you've seen the changes there. I've witnessed
Yeah.
some of the changes and investigated some of the changes, so you might have something to say about those changes. That might be important to you, or there might be something else that's
Well, I
important
mean,
to you.
the highest level, there's a tension right now between what some people call social justice
Yeah.
and the purpose of and the traditional purpose of a university, which is the pursuit of truth. So, or something along those lines. You could formulate it in different ways. But I mean, why do these institutions exist? The answer to that for at least 150 years has been in order to produce new knowledge and disseminate that knowledge. And that mission requires absolute freedom of expression. So you can't do that if you're going to restrict freedom of expression. And that's been codified in all sorts of different university policies trying to ensure that. I'm talking about a modern secular university. But there's, over the past decade or so, there's been an ascendancy of an alternative goal of the university, which is something sometimes called social justice, although I still don't really understand what that means. What does it mean? It seems to me that justice is justice, and you don't need any sort of qualifier for the term. And whenever someone calls something social justice, it seems to me to be an excuse to do some sort of actual injustice to somebody. But we say, oh, we can do it because there's this social good that is higher. So even though we're going to do you some injustice, it could be small, it could be large. In our cases, it's mostly smaller. It's denying the admission of somebody, or it's basically discriminating in hiring and admission against certain people in order to affect some perceived social good. In other countries where this term has been used, it's been the denial of justice has been much more severe and included death and confiscation of property. But essentially, you use this justification of a higher social good, a so-called social justice, to justify behavior that is unjust against individual people. And so there's this thing, social justice, which is being touted as an alternative objective of the university. And so I think that's the highest order struggle. Do we agree that this thing called social justice is an important thing for universities to pursue? And if it collides with the pursuit of truth, which one is the higher value that takes precedence? And that's essentially the struggle.
And is this struggle happening across the board, or are there different, from your perspective, are different universities taking different sides on this, or are they all kind of going in one direction? Is it kind of a unified question that everybody's going to have to accept or reject?
Well, they're not all 100% unified. I would say a lot of universities are taking social justice as the highest good. University of Chicago has done better. And we actually had a big success this week. So I helped found this group that we call UChicago Free, which has about 50 faculty members. And we exist to lobby for academic freedom at the university. So, and one of the central components of that is the corporate neutrality on social and political issues, which is contained in something we call the Calvin Report, named after a Mr. Calvin. And so the idea is that the university and all units of it should not make statements on social and political events that are not related to the university. So they should not say like, the Kyle Rittenhouse verdict is an example of white supremacy, blah, 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 blah. There were serial violations of this and extreme violations across the university in 2020. That was the worst. There have been some since, but that was when it was the worst. And the websites, you can go to our website, UChicago Free, that we've documented all of the websites where these were made, and they're still up. And so we've been lobbying the new president, who started this fall, but we've been talking to him since before he started a year ago, trying to get these taken down, trying to get some sort of, because there was no enforcement mechanism. There's this Calvin report we have, but then nobody said how it was going to happen. It was supposed to be enforced ultimately, I guess, by the president and provost, but nobody was doing it. So they were going ahead and making these statements like, I don't know, we live in a systemically racist society, and every white person has an obligation to fight and disrupt the system for social justice, or something like that. So that would come from the dean of like the social work school. So in other words, making a prescription that every person in that school should have to view the issue in that way. And that if they disagree and try to voice those disagreements, they're not welcome, which is not a good culture to encourage if you want free thinking and the pursuit of truth.
Well, social work isn't about free thinking. It's about changing the world, right? You philosophers just try to understand the world, but their goal is to change it, right?
Yeah, well, so they're at the University of Chicago. If their goal is not to try to understand the world, they should be somewhere else. A social work faculty, a graduate student in social work, they should be trying to understand social work. They should be trying to understand what the truth is. So that's how I would frame that. So anyways, we've been meeting with the president about this for a year. And yesterday he told us that with the deans, the provost, the president, and the deans, they've agreed on a policy that statements such as this are not allowed. And they're going to post it on their website, the provost website, and inform all the deans that it has to be enforced. And then we can go around and email each individual dean with a department or school statement or whatever under them with a violating statement, and they're supposed to remove it. And if they don't remove it, we're supposed to go to the provost or the president. And so...
How is this not a suppression of freedom of speech? How is this not violating the free expression?
Well, so that's the whole point of this freedom. So there's two issues here. There's freedom of expression of the faculty and of the students and of people that are invited. Okay. But there's no freedom for corporate expression, because allowing corporate expression inherently censors disagreeing free expression of faculty and students. So the whole point is to promote free expression of faculty and students. But in order to do that, you have to restrict expression by the administrators, saying this is the official line that we all hold. And if you disagree from that, your job is in jeopardy, or your ability to get grants or goodies within the university. So it's not that, first of all, it's important to point out that university administrators do not have academic freedom. They never have, and they do not now. And that's not part of the University of Chicago system. So if you're the dean or the president, you don't get to say, like, I'm the dean and I think, X should be president of the country. That's not something that's granted to you. The board of trustees could fire you for that.
Because you're acting on behalf of the university, and the university is supposed to maintain a certain specific form of neutrality. So neutrality with regard to political and social issues is what you're saying.
So we hold ourselves to that. Not every university has signed up for that, but we hold ourselves to that. And it's incredibly important for advancing academic freedom. So everybody knows about the Chicago principles, which say that you can't stop a speaker or other speech because you find it offensive, or immoral or whatever. Like, everybody gets the right to say what they want to say. And if you disagree with it, make a counter argument. Don't try to stop them. Okay. That's the Chicago principles. But equally important is this Calvin report, the social and political neutrality of the institution. And so I co-authored a Newsweek op-ed with Sergio Kleinerman from Princeton and Ivan Marinovich from Stanford about this, that people can find if they're interested. And you also should look up the story of Joshua Katz at Princeton to show what happens when this is not being enforced. So what happened was, there was a professor at Princeton in 2020. There was one of these crazy petitions that was circulated demanding that Princeton do this whole list of things related to anti-racism. Mm-hmm. And he wrote an essay in a journal called Quillette opposing this. And at some point in the essay, he mentioned some group that a former student group that had harassed other students who disagreed with them. And he used the word terrorized other students. And so then they sort of focused on this and called him a crazy racist, et cetera, et cetera. Then the university issued a statement saying he was a crazy racist. And then the university started a training program for incoming students, okay? Not an educational program, an indoctrination program, a training program for incoming students that they were required to take and that they weren't allowed to have dissenting views on. This would be the sort of thing like, here are the rules, our rules about sexual harassment, right? This is sexual harassment. This isn't. You have to be trained in it. There's no disagreement on that. This is what the rules are that we're going to enforce. So you better know them. Well, they released this as a training program on racism at Princeton. And they used him specifically, a sitting faculty member, and this essay as an example of racists at Princeton. And not only that, but they took the quote from the article that he had written and they changed it to make it look even worse. Okay, and this is being done by this so-called DEI office, diversity, equity, and inclusion. And so this is an example where you have the university taking positions on social and political issues, in this case, specifically to censor and silence a faculty member. And so it shows you how academic freedom is killed if you have the university doing that. And so it's not censorship you could say it's censorship. You're censoring the administrators in a certain sense. You're saying that they can't say whatever they want.
Yeah.
But that doesn't mean it's bad necessarily. It's the point here is to pursue the telos. You have to keep that always in mind. What's the objective of this institution?
Yeah.
It's the discovery and dissemination of new knowledge. That's what it should be. And the purpose of these rules are to advance that objective.
Okay. And to protect it from a specifically openly activistic trend in higher education.
Yeah, towards this thing, so-called social justice.
What happened with Professor Katz? Is there a...
Well, it's one of these funny things where, he's in a terrible situation.
Okay. He's still there?
He's still there. He's not allowed to teach as far as I know. But, he's also getting investigated for other things. Once they decide to go after this like huge institutional machinery, once you're in its crosshairs, they're going to find all sorts of ways to try to get you.
Yeah.
And that's what's happening to him. So he's being sort of
persecuted,
embarrassed and silenced. And let's just say it wouldn't be a surprise to find out that he's no longer on the faculty at Princeton at some point in the future.
Mm-hmm. So when did you guys draft this Calvin report or come up with the...
So this is from 1967. So I was not involved in drafting that or even alive.
Okay.
And
has it been in use since then?
Yes.
At Chicago?
And so it originally came out of Vietnam era protests. And it was a way, for the university to state more clearly what had always been its policy. And in particular to say, we can't take, the university can't take official positions on the Vietnam War without alienating some component of our community. And we are a community only for the purposes of research and teaching. We are not a community otherwise, and there's no reason for us to make a community statement. It was later, there have been a number of instances where it's been invoked, including the boycotting of divesting from South Africa. And also, I think, divesting from Sudan or something like that. Basically, the university had been pretty consistent until 2020 about not making these statements. And then all of a sudden, it just went bonkers all at once. And you could see that it was like a dam bursting. It's like the dean over there makes one statement and then the dean over here doesn't want to be left in the dust. I think the term they use is like being on the wrong side of history, the people who are in this culture. So that dean doesn't want to get on the wrong side of history. He rushes out to make a statement, and then this department chair does. And then the next thing you know, you have students trying to get faculty fired for expressing mild opinions that disagree with that narrative, and they feel justified in doing it because there have been these official university statements. And then the defense of the faculty, in this case it was Harold Uleg and me, involves from many administrators a lot of hemming and hawing rather than the full-throated defense of academic freedom that you would expect at the University of Chicago, which of course did come from the president at the time, President Zimmer. But there was a rot in the institution, and lower level administrators had lost track of what our purpose was and weren't able to articulate our purpose in a coherent way and explain to these students, look, you disagree with what those people said, write an essay about it, give a speech about it, organize a seminar where someone addresses your concerns. Don't try to get the guy fired or silenced.
Why do you think, since from your point of view, 2 decades plus in these various institutions, why do you think that institutional rot has occurred, or that loss of telos?
Well, okay, so this is a really complicated question, and there are various hypotheses. It's not considered a settled science. It's useful to start with that. The 2 main hypotheses that are out there that I'm aware of that seem to have some, at least some people agree with them. Number one, Haidt and Lukianoff, their hypothesis is that social media has damaged people's ability, their ability to disagree, and that this is sort of, and moreover, their sort of mental health. And the universities have relatedly encouraged ways of thinking about the world that are damaging to mental health. And so there are people who are experiencing actual distress when they hear something they disagree with. I mean, I guess that's normal, but they don't know how to process it, or they're not realizing that this is an environment where you're supposed to experience distress and you're supposed to calmly and rationally come up with a counter argument, not just give in to your emotions. Mm-hmm. And so their explanation would be something like young people didn't get as many independent experiences as children, and then they were exposed to social media, and then they were in the safety culture in the schools and in the universities, and now they have meltdowns and they think they need more safety.
Well, that explains the young people, but not the kowtowing to the young people that is occurring in...
So the other problem with it is, with that hypothesis, although it could be a part of the story, is that I think it is too generous. So it's not taking into account the fact that not all of these people are actually experiencing distress. A significant fraction appear to be using the excuse of distress to try to silence speech that they disagree with for political reasons. And so I actually prefer the hypothesis that I associate with Lee Jussum, a social psychologist at Rutgers. Do you know who that is?
Yeah.
He has a Twitter that people might like. I think it's called the Dread Pirate Jussum. Anyways, Lee Jussum, his hypothesis is that, so he's documented extensively that there's been a major shift in the politics of the university professors. And actually Samuel Abrams has documented this with administrators. He's at Sarah Lawrence. And it's even worse for administrators. But it went from 50 years ago, the professorate would be maybe, I don't know the exact numbers, but roughly 3/4 on the left and 1/4 on the right. And I don't know, maybe there's some, and including some centrists or whatever. But now it's more like 20-1 on the left. And so Lee's argument would be something like, well, I mean, I'm going to try to construct it. I'm going to try to give you what I think his argument would be, or his hypothesis, but he might say it a little bit differently. But the argument would go something like this. On either political side, there's some fraction of people who basically think that the other side is evil and needs to be destroyed and not reasoned with or talked to. And when you have some people from both sides, that fraction can't really get control. People more in the center kind of are able to control the situation. But when you get to the point where you don't even have any centrists in the faculty, and it's just a question of how left-wing you are, all of a sudden, those wackies are going to be the ones kind of running the show. And they will view any disagreement from their narrative as,
a
evil.
violation of principles.
Evil.
Yeah,
evil.
Yeah.
And so I find that to be more convincing. And then why is it so effective? And why do the administrators get on board with it? I think the call for justice is good, right? We want to live in a just society, and people should be concerned with justice and thinking about it. And social justice is a sleight of hand that's used by people in power to distract them from actual injustices that they're participating in and that they're not interested in trying to solve. So it's extremely effective for people in power, and that's why they go along with it. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. So those would be sort of the various components of that I could spout off the top of my head, although someone who studied it more carefully might be able to give you a better analysis.
Well, I bring that up to ask the question, why is the University of Chicago different? Or what makes your culture of your university a little bit different? Because other universities have completely collapsed under the social justice stuff. So what's the culture?
Well, we have a tradition of free exchange. We have these documents that, are legally binding. But in theory, they're part of our contracts. So
something about the culture maintained that, because most universities believed all these principles 10 years ago, 15 years ago. But there's something
but they didn't have these documents saying this is our official policy.
Okay.
Which it turns out makes some difference. You at least have something you could point to.
Okay.
Because the other side is amazing at obfuscating and tricking things and turning things around and playing word games. Like, that's their wheelhouse. Yeah. And so if you have something that, they even try to do this with these documents. I heard someone say once, the Calvin report, it can be interpreted in so many different ways. It's like the Old Testament. I was like, have you ever read either the Calvin report or the Old Testament? The Old Testament was written thousands of years ago, and it's a collection of different works by different human authors in different genres even. The first question you have to ask when you read any of it is like, am I looking at poetry? Am I looking at allegory? Am I looking at something that's attempting to be a historical account? Yeah. This is a document written by like our grandfathers it's like 2 pages long in modern English and says exactly what it means.
Yeah. Yeah.
So anyways, they try to obfuscate and complicate and problematize. I've noticed this is also a very popular word. And so it helps that we had those documents and that they're fairly clear. But then there's also a culture, and you said, okay, the culture changed at other institutions, but it wasn't so strong at other institutions. Harvard was always Harvard. I was trained at Harvard, but Harvard was always about, through all of its various incarnations, Harvard has been about training the elite and preparing them for entering society and being the elite. And this is just like kind of a new manifestation of that. Whereas the University of Chicago is different. It's always been much more focused on almost excesses of strange intellectual pursuit. Just doing things for the fun of you're like Sanskrit, going nuts on Sanskrit, and not caring so much about this preparing for being the best politicians and bankers. And so I think that's a point of distinction. And so but that means that it's attracted that type of independent free thinker. That was a big part of why I chose to be on the faculty at University of Chicago as opposed to other places. What was a big draw to me. And so that's, an important component. The problem is we also have these departments. I mean, I don't know what you would call them, but we have departments, we have negative departments, you know what I mean, that do negative work, that they do negative work towards the truth. They make human beings less likely to reach the truth. We have whole departments doing that. And so that
across academia, or are you talking specifically about your university?
At University of Chicago, you know, we have the X studies cuckoo departments, just like everyone else. And so we got these guys too, who are not aligned with the mission of the university. And that's a problem. And then we also have a lot of young faculty who come from other places and are not sufficiently incorporated into the culture. And they bring the other traditions, which, you know, are less grounded in the pursuit of truth. And so that's another struggle that we have.
And what, I guess you already said that these documents give your side, sorry to make it tribal, grounding to preserve the tradition of the University of Chicago. I know for a fact that these X departments, these studies departments, these activists are hell-bent on taking over the entire institution, and they have a bunch of tricks to do that. Psychosocial, emotional tricks to do that. So it's a pitched battle, but what gives you guys the edge in Chicago? I just have to say, it's 50. It's amazing that 50 faculty are on board with like keeping your institution going down. Just
to give you a sense of where we stand, we had a big success working with the president. I'm much less optimistic about the faculty. So I got elected after I started getting in trouble. I got elected to the council of the University Senate. So there's about 1,000 voting faculty members, and there's 17 who get elected every year for 3-year terms. So there's 51 of us. Mm-hmm. And our job is to advise the president on issues related to academics, departments, and stuff like that. And so there was a proposal that was started in 2020 for a Department of Critical Race Studies. So they're really putting it out there, like basically there's no question what the acceptable interpretations of the world are in this department, which is supposed to be anathema at the University of Chicago. We're supposed to have departments that seek to study issues in an unbiased way, using what methods are appropriate to reach the truth. We're not supposed to say only Marxist interpretations are correct, or only critical race theory interpretations are correct. So there was some pushback internally, and so they sort of changed it to the Department of Race, Diaspora, and Indigeneity, RDI. And, you know, whatever that means. But still the document was permeated with critical race theory. And, you know, people pushed back and argued, and there was a whole 1.5-year process, and it got a little better, but it was still clear what they were up to. And I mean, I don't even know what the last version of the document was, but one of the versions was saying, you know, like, we're trying to train activists. It was pretty explicit. We're not pursuing truth. Our goal is to train activists. Okay, great. So anyways, this came before the council, and Harold Uleg and I, so we got elected to the council a year ago, and we gave speeches against it, and how, you know, it's a violation of this Calvin report for a university department to have an official position on these issues, et cetera, and that it's not the tradition of the University of Chicago. And one of the big arguments was, all the other universities have such a department and we don't. And so, you know, our argument was, well, that's good. That's, you know, that's why we came here. Let Harvard be, that was one of the lines of my speech. Let Harvard be Harvard, and let the University of Chicago continue to be the University of Chicago. So, but at the vote, it was 39-4 or something like that, or 37-4
to open this
whatever
department.
It was. Maybe not everybody voted. Yeah, so we got totally blown out of the water. Yeah. So it's not like we're going to win. We know it to a certain extent. Right now, it's a rearguard action. You know, the side of truth and I guess the side of truth and honest intellectual debate is losing. We know that. Even at UChicago, we're not going to get wins every time. But the idea is to you don't want it to turn into a total rout where everybody's running away and the enemy just comes and picks off whoever they want. We have to set up a defense so that people can escape and we can regroup. And the hope is that on a multi-decadal time scale, we'll turn the ship around.
Okay, if it does take that long, do you think that in 15 years science will still be around?
Well, I mean, I hope that competition is going to solve this problem. So, like, let me give you an example. In the 20th century, the unfavored group that was able to, the group that was most heavily discriminated against at universities, who do you think it was?
Was it the Jews?
Yeah, it was the Jews. It was the
Okay.
Jews.
Sorry.
That's like the, National Brotherhood Day. Do you know that little song? National
I
Brotherhood
don't know
Day.
that. Do I want to know that? Is
National
this a
Brotherhood
body
Day.
tale? Is this like some...
It's like one of these funny, he's this funny guy. I forget what his name is. But anyways, he writes these funny songs and he talks about how these people hate these people and these people hate these people and these people hate these people and everybody hates the Jews. And so, it's kind of, I guess it's one not totally incorrect interpretation of history. But anyways, yeah. So of course it was the Jews who were most heavily discriminated against in the 20th century. And I say that because there could be other people that were discriminated against, but they were the ones who were had all the qualifications to be successful at universities, but somehow were being turned away. So University of Chicago said, we're not going to do that. We're going to hire the best people. We don't care if they're Jewish or not. And as a result, it catapulted itself from sort of second tier to first tier.
No.
And so I'm sort of waiting for some university to do that in the current era, because there's a lot of undervalued academic assets floating around on the market. And if somebody just said, look, we're going to hire the best people, we don't care about, what their skin color is, or, whether they're boys or girls, or who that or the other thing, we're just going to hire people based on merit. That university is instantly going to blow the others out of the water. And then hopefully that will solve the problem, because nobody likes losing.
Yeah. Well, the competition, it's difficult because competition comes with, they've shorted up with accreditation.
Yeah. Okay. So there's that problem. And the accreditation institutions, they require diversity, equity, inclusion, blah, blah, blah. Yeah. But, and that's a problem because you have to get the accreditation to get the federal funding. Yeah. So
and for accreditation for the funding, and also for your degree to translate into something meaningful out there.
Well, no, like Harvard doesn't need that, but but to get the federal funding, that's a big big leverage. But hopefully you could have that's all laws, right? That's something that could change. And so you could have some, the requirements for getting the funding, or the who's allowed to do the accreditation, our politicians could deal with that. And the politicians are less crazy, which is a funny thing to say. But in this situation, the politicians are less crazy just because they actually respond to the people. And most people in the country are not on board with this craziness.
The perception versus reality thing, or aspect of this problem is pretty interesting, because most people are not social justice warriors, but social justice warriors have a oversized footprint in every major domain of public discourse, media, academia. Specifically, they have the wedge there. Most people are like,
so you can view that as a negative or a positive. So I'm by nature an optimistic person, so I view that as a positive, because what it means is, if these Looney Tunes with their cuckoo ideas that a 5-year-old can see through can have that much influence just by being noisy, imagine what if we can just get 5% of the faculty to be brave enough to actually say, look, guys, we're not going along with that. Imagine how much influence we could have. You can have, if they can punch above their weight, then we can punch above their weight. And that's what we're trying to do with groups like UChicago Free. I mean, it's a broad, nonpartisan group. We have people from as far left as left goes and as far right as right goes, and not even right academic. Like, I'm a right academic, which means I'm a centrist, maybe centrist.
Yeah.
Okay. But we actually have right wingers in there, and we have obviously a lot of left wingers. And it's a group that once you get that many people together and you start saying to the president, look, we care about this stuff. We're going to make noise unless something starts to happen. We were able to get meetings with him and influence the policy that he's putting in place. And so we need more adults in the room to act like adults. There's all these people here who disagree with that stuff, who are tenured faculty, and they're not, you're not going to get taken out back and shot for disagreeing with this stuff. It's not it's not Bolshevik cancel culture. I agree, not yet, but this is the time. Like, you got to look, you got to, if you're scared of talking now, think of what's your fear of what could happen if you don't talk. You got to weigh your fears. You can't just let you can't let the bias of just do nothing take over. You got to think about where project forward a little bit. And so that's sort of what I think needs to happen. I think the faculty here's the problem. Most faculty who are practitioners in their field, they got to that job by obsessively studying that field. What do I want to be doing right now? I want to be playing with a supercomputer and equations. No offense, not talking about on a podcast. And so most people are just like, oh, that's what I want to do. They're saying their crazy stuff. I'm just going to keep my head down and do my weird, science. But the problem is, eventually, if everybody does that, it's a tragedy of the commons. The commons of a coherent university that's pursuing the truth disappears. And instead of a commons where everyone can graze their sheep, you have a hellhole, a social justice hellhole of dung. And that's all that's left. And so somebody needs to stand up and defend the commons. And we just need more faculty to do that.
That is a point well taken. I went to Evergreen State College. It imploded in 2017, had a huge intersectional meltdown, social justice up the wazoo, totally the farthest you could imagine that to happen. And the administration played along with that, doubled down on all these social justice equity policies, hired a bunch of these diversity administrators, started stripping teachers of free speech. They actually shut down the listserv that teachers could voice their opinion. And now the college is next to dead. It's absolutely next to dead, because a student could go to any college to learn social justice. Why would they go to Evergreen State College to learn social justice? Like, there's nothing special about social justice anymore. It's everywhere. They doubled down. They bet the entire horse or house or whatever on social justice, and now it's everywhere. And that happened largely because I read all the documents, I got all the emails and stuff. It happened largely because a very small contingent of radical professors started to dictate how everybody else spoke, and then the administration sided with them, and then the bulk of students who didn't want to have anything to do with this, and the bulk of faculty that didn't want to have anything to do with this, and staff that didn't want to have anything to do with this, all just had to go along with this or get pilloried, right, on all the
so that's the problem. But I hope people can look at my situation. Now, obviously, I'm privileged, not privileged like the social justice warriors would have. But I'm privileged in that I'm a tenured faculty member at the University of Chicago. So it's easy for me to say, oh, be braver. But people at least can look at my situation and say, well, that guy's still functioning. There's a lot of people mad at me. There's people
you got mad. You were subjected to a maddening.
Yeah, but it's not like, but I'm still standing. I'm still doing my thing. I'm still having fun doing my science. There's a lot of people who don't want to work with me. Oh, well, I don't have to work with them. It's harder for me to get a grant but whatever, who cares? Like you got to sort of,
Really? So the grant applications are subjected to some sort of social, not social governance stuff. What is that? SLG or
yeah. I
something
mean,
like that?
I'll give you a simple example of what I'm talking about. So, these two guys contact me, we're writing a big grant to NSF. And then the NSF officer kind of like with a wink, wink, nod, nod, lets them know that their grant's not going to get funded unless they have a minority or a woman on it. It's just me and these two guys. Okay, so then they go around searching. This happened this winter, and so we've already like been developing ideas and started writing it. And they ask a few women, and none of them will agree to be on the grant because of me. And then so the other guys are
Why?
like,
Because of your rank sexism? Is that why?
I mean, I didn't interrogate their
Oh,
perspective.
okay.
I don't know for sure. This is all I
You
know.
got a reputation as not as the good kind of bad boy.
Well, it depends what you mean. I mean, but yeah, I suppose it's because, well, yeah, it's hard to say. I mean, either they're offended by someone disagreeing with what they say, or they are, uh,
There's a
or they're just
social.
worried about like what will happen to them if they get associated with me. And I don't know which one it is.
What
But
did you do that was so angering, other than
oh,
saving the
here's my
university?
offense. So I've been
Okay.
consistently arguing that each person has inherent dignity as a human being and should be treated with respect.
You believe that?
Yeah.
And you
Uh,
said that out loud?
yeah, consistently over and over again and in editorials. And so that's really bad in the social justice framework because I'm saying that you shouldn't view people primarily as members of groups.
Yeah.
And this is called a white supremacist. It's referred to as white supremacist. That doesn't mean what it used to mean, like someone who's in the Ku Klux Klan or something. But the claim is that supporting systems that could lead to unequal outcomes is white
On a
supremacy.
group level.
Yeah, on a group level is white supremacy. Okay, and on a group level, every system, you'd have to. I mean, actually, every system has to lead to unequal outcomes, both on a group level and on an individual level, unless you're constantly resetting it. So that's my main offense. The other thing is that if you view each human being as having inherent dignity, and you are against using human beings instrumentally as a means to affect some social outcome, then you are opposed to the mechanisms that the social justice crowd wants to use.
To
And
affect
so
social justice.
to affect social justice. And so for two reasons, I've said things that they are very against.
Um, those values that you hold and
Yeah.
so brashly wrote articles about,
Yeah.
um, they just seem like the safe bet for the future of civilization. Like it seems like that was what was like making this whole thing work, like all these different people with all these different groups on a massive scale with all this infrastructure that if it collapsed would cause massive damage. Like that value of individual dignity, the
Yeah.
rights and responsibilities and dignity of the individual is what made this entire thing work.
Well, so if I'm going to put on my social justice hat, which is
Okay.
not a hat I wear very often, but let me, so there's a few assumptions that you've made in there. So first of all, that made this whole thing work. So they would immediately say it doesn't work.
It
So
doesn't
when they
work.
look around at this country, they say it's bad, it's evil, it's bad. All I see is bad things.
Okay.
And then the thing when you say like that keeps it from collapsing, so they argue for it to collapse, although this would be called a revolution,
Yeah.
and that would be viewed as a positive thing. And so they wouldn't necessarily disagree with what you said, but they would view it as good.
Okay.
I think that's how they would probably respond. At
Have
least someone
you
who's being honest.
Have you gotten insight into what they want, like at the end of the revolution? Do you have you
Uh-huh.
gotten a sense that they have a clear and present goal, like
Well,
well,
it's
a clear?
funny. I mean, like, I mean, if you read Marx, like he's notoriously vague on exactly what that's going to look like and how it's going to work. And a lot of this stuff is kind of like a
Okay.
Marxist. It's a lot of it's sort of
But have
Marxist.
you? I mean, yeah, I agree with you. But have you seen anybody actually say like this is the end goal, or is it the work is ongoing, the work doesn't end, which is what I've seen. I haven't seen like a
Yeah, no,
explicit.
there's no question. It's more like that. And in fact, it's more framed like if you acknowledge a success, you're being complacent in the
Oh yeah.
struggle
Okay.
for social justice. And
Yeah.
so you have
Okay.
to always find the
To
bad thing.
nitpick. I mean to
Yeah. Actually,
problematize.
I read there's some guy, Murray, British guy.
Douglas.
Yeah,
Yeah.
Douglas Murray. And he had a book that I read a couple years ago, and he talked
Madness
about
of
St.
crowds.
George in retirement.
Oh, I haven't heard that one.
And so this idea was, St. George slays the dragon, but then he goes into retirement and like he's going after ever smaller and smaller dragons, trying to relive his glory. And eventually he's, like killing the neighborhood cat and calling it a dragon. And so that was sort of his explanation of what's going on here. Once you've basically accomplished social justice or what everyone thought was civil rights, if you're the sort of person that wants to be part of that struggle and that gives your life meaning, you got to find something else to say is unjust that you can fight against.
Mm-hmm. The
And
reckon,
so
not the
that
sword.
was sort of his explanation of a lot of what's going on.
You so you guys are working locally. It's heartening that you have so many people with Free Chicago, Chicago Free,
You're
yeah, you
Chicago
Chicago
free.
Free, because like I said, Evergreen,
They
nobody.
also have to all to be a part of the group, to be on the listserv, you have to be willing to list your name on our website
Okay,
publicly. So we don't have anyone we don't want any sort of hangers on or people who aren't ready to openly defend academic freedom.
at the risk of grants and reputation and slander and maybe a couple protests outside of your office door.
Yeah, basically. Yeah. I mean, it ends up with a funny group. You end up with some very strongly opinionated people,
Yeah.
but it's just fine for me, especially the right left mix. And
Yeah.
that's the difficulty of this coalition. I mean, the anti woke coalition is a mixture of people on the right and on the left because it's primarily a freedom versus authoritarian thing. And
Yeah.
there are freedom loving people on the right and the left, as there are authoritarians on the right and the left. So that's a funny thing. The other funny thing that I've noticed is it tends to be a mixture of rationalists and of people who are, value rationality and view truth as a real thing that can be pursued. And that seems to be a mixture of scientific atheists and, well, Christians that I've met. There may be other groups involved. So that's another funny little coalition that seems to have coalesced.
Well, the interesting thing about that is that, like you were saying, there was something novel you said about the reason that Chicago exists, or the University of Chicago exists, is because for no other purpose than to pursue truth and disseminate truth. Other than that, we don't have a community,
Yeah.
and that's the interesting about this group is that the only thing that bonds you guys together is that you want to preserve the pursuit of truth and the freedom of thought and speech that entails. And so, of course, you're going to get like this you're gonna have some pretty cool pizza and beer nights, you know.
Yeah, we've had one. We're trying to organize another, but the that's been lost in the present culture, right? We should be able. So, for example, suppose I want to talk to you on your show, right? We should be able to have a conversation on this show, no matter what other things you've said or I've said, right?
Mm.
Suppose you want to buy a sandwich from your local sandwich maker. The only thing you should have to think about is, does this guy make a good sandwich at a good price? Even if you disagree with him on who should be the president, that shouldn't influence whether you get a sandwich from him.
Mm-hmm.
But somehow this has been completely lost in the present society. They're telling us that we have, and that's a recipe for disaster in a free society, that you have to agree on points 1 through 37 in order to engage in society. we're going to disagree with people on various things. That's okay.
Are you guys mapping out a way, like to wrap up? Are you guys mapping out, or are you guys taking notes? Is somebody taking notes in your organization, you Free Chicago or you Chicago Free, about how to establish this and that it can be replicated at other
Yeah,
universities?
definitely. So, I mean, we're keeping notes as everything goes. I have this heterodox STEM Substack that I run, and I'm hoping to write up an article.
What's it called?
Heterodox
STEM?
STEM. Heterodox STEM. I'm not even going to touch that.
I was trying to give you an opening,
for cancellation. So yeah, it's a Substack that I've been running. Where we can post stuff, and so I'm going to try to write something up. But yeah, actually, the president is on board, and we've proposed starting some sort of center for a free society, where at UChicago, where we could do all sorts of things. We could have
lecturers,
controversial speakers. Yeah. We could host people who've been canceled, academics who've been canceled. That's sort of a shelter place. But we could also develop orientation material. That's a key thing that people don't realize. Like, a lot of this stuff can be fended off with effective orientation. So, for example, like, suppose you come in as a student.
You mean training?
No, orientation. Yeah, training. And we want to make more training. Suppose you come in as a student. Like, it's actually useful to know what the sexual harassment rules are, right?
Yes.
That you want to know
rules of engagement.
So Absolutely. You don't break the rules, okay?
Crystal clear.
Well, also, why not inform the students of what our rules are surrounding academic freedom, and put them through exercises where someone makes an argument that speech they favor should be restricted, so that they can sort of see why we have these rules, things like that. Put them in the seat of an administrator and have other people arguing for them that their favorite thing. Well, I mean, like, let's say you have a pro-abortion student. So, there's a lot of people that think making a pro-abortion argument is immoral. So put them through a situation where they have to be the administrator, and someone saying that viewpoint is immoral and it's harmful, et cetera, so they can start to appreciate why we have these rules. So that sort of thing. Develop materials like that. So we want to do all that kind of stuff at this center, and then try to spread it out to other universities. I mean, that's the dream.
It absolutely it's necessary for you guys to do this in order for the academy to be saved, and it's an irony. It's a delicious irony for me. So I went to Evergreen. I documented that whole thing. The Chicago statement came out. The Chicago principles came out, enshrining free speech, saying this is not a safe space. And the president of the Evergreen State College came out with an op-ed saying, no, free speech is not important. Safe spaces are important. He went absolutely against the University of Chicago principles. And we see what happened to Evergreen. And Evergreen is the canary in the coal mine or whatever. It's a perfect example of what happens when that social justice ideology takes over every other facet of the institution. And if you guys are able to mount a defense of that and maintain that Chicago principle style, then you guys can, be that guiding light that gets us through the dark ages.
Well, that's what we hope. That's what we hope. But, but like I said, right now it's a rearguard defense.
Yeah, it is.
And it's not making me and some of the other members of the group particularly popular on campus, at least with the faculty. But there's a lot of students who are really, into it. And I meet a lot of students who tell me that. So
yeah. No, there's a market for knowledge, and again, the social justice stuff, it blinds the people who believe in it from the reality of the situation. So they're actually in a very weak position, even though they got all the ground covered.
Well, you can see how weak of a position it is from the fact that they don't want it to ever be debated. So they don't have, the arguments are not strong, right? Yeah. Their position is weak. And so they would prefer to just censor anyone who disagrees with them.
Yeah. Big red flag there.
Yeah.
Well, Dorian Abbot, thank you for your time. Sorry that I was late to the conversation.
No problem. And also, thank you for your show. I should mention, I heard about it because I'm friends with, I got to remember his
Sophia. No.
No, his anonymous name. He wrote
Charles Pennicourt?
Pinker. Whew, I almost outed him. Good thing I stopped myself.
I could have edited it out, but yeah.
Yeah. Okay. So I'm friends with Pincourt. So then he told me he was on your show. So I found it. And then I really enjoyed some of your interviews. I liked Hooven, Logan, and Jacobs a lot in particular. And, like you're making a space for some of these ideas to get out, which is important. So thank you.
Well, the ideas in the people,
Yeah.
because it's what we're just carriers of ideas, I guess.
Yeah.
So, please send me links that I will link in the description down below, resources, stuff like that. Your Substack
Yeah.
that's not called HeteroStem, which is
No, it's not. No.
you should run with that at some point. At least come out with a swimsuit calendar when you're ready.
I don't think anyone
resources.
wants to see that.
I don't know. There's got to be some buff STEM folk out there. Anyways.
Yeah. See, everything that's happening right now is like all of my danger flags are going up.
Okay. Yeah,
Because
you're
any
blushing.
of this sort of talk at the university, it's so funny because it just like fun, just banter, having fun with somebody. You got to watch your butt now.
Yeah. It's a nightmare. But
It's also
joking
especially
aside.
a nightmare if you happen to be like a nerdy scientist who is not super good at remembering all the social rules. It's like, which algorithm am I supposed to be running right now?
Okay, I'll take you off the hot seat then.
Okay, great. Thank you.
Thanks a lot.
Yeah. Bye.